And joining me live in the studio is the CEO of the Smart Energy Council, John Grimes. John, great to see you. Lots to talk about off the back of the government's major $1 billion spend last week announced on the Solar Sunshot program. What did you make of the commitment?
Well, the history of solar in Australia has been a history of lost opportunity. Do you know it's Australians that invented the solar panels used around the world today? That has turned into a $1 trillion global opportunity, and basically none of it has been retained for the Australian economy and Australian people. So finally, we've got a government that's doing some strategic investment to support not just the intellectual property, but the commercialisation of that intellectual property, and that's a really big step forward for Australia.
Incredible that it was an Australian breakthrough, the solar panel. This Sunshot initiative and company, they argue that this is the most efficient solar panel in the world. I wonder, are we the most efficient country to manufacture it, though? Well, can we compete with the likes of China?
Well, China manufactures at scale. They produce over 90% of the solar panels used around the world. So in terms of the global marathon on renewables, China is well ahead of everybody else. But Australia has that innovation edge. So this new technology that's 30% cheaper to produce and is the most efficient solar panel in the world, again, an innovation here in Sydney. If we can strategically back a company like that, there's no reason we can't retain more of that value for Australia. And Kieran, I think we have to. Imagine if coal, oil and gas all came from one single source of supply. You need to have security, you need to have access, and so it's important the government does invest in this strategic sector.
So in terms of investing, yes, and it makes sense to have that sovereign capacity, but can it compete?
Well, actually, the delta on solar panels is really low. So, a solar panel made in China comes in at about 26 cents per watt. In Australia, it comes at about 30 cents per watt. So there is a delta, but it's not a huge delta. And the flow-on benefits then means that you're making the aluminium framing, you're making the glass, you're making the junction boxes, you're making all of those components in the Australian economy and not shipping that off.
And I guess local consumers would like an Australian-made alternative and one that is more efficient. So you get more bang for your buck, basically, in terms of the amount of panels you have on your roof. You get more power out of it.
Totally. People often, get sucked in by the sticker price, going for the cheapest option. But when you're investing in solar, you're actually get a return over 25 or 30 years. If you can get a more efficient system, it might cost you a few more dollars up for an extra $500 or something, but it's going to return multiples of that over the life of the system. So that quality and efficiency really means something.
Research out of your organisation showed that the investment in utility scale renewables was at $6.5 billion in 2022. The next year, 2023, it was down from $6.5 billion to $1.5 billion. Is that stalling investment in renewables? Will the government get to its target of 82% renewables by 2030?
Well, the policy that was driving renewables was the renewable energy target. Now, that ended in 2020. And so the government in 2023 put a new policy in place called the Capacity Investment Scheme to build 34 gigawatts of new renewables and energy storage. That's about half the total generation of the generation fleet in Australia. It's a big build between now and 2030. So that's coming in, but there are some glitches. Places like New South Wales, the planning process is just taking too long. It can take over 3 years to get approval for a wind farm up, for example. And when we're trying to transition at speed and at scale, that's really not good enough.
That's out of the New South Wales government, but where else? Queensland looks like things are happening much more quickly. Is the concern, though, around transmission lines through farming areas and through regional areas that don't want transmission lines? Is that also an issue that you've got to try and manage as an industry?
Social licence, absolutely critical. And you can't take communities or people for granted. And so you absolutely need to have that engagement. And there needs to be benefit sharing, Kieran. So if you go into a community, why not offer the people in that community a lower electricity rate as a result of hosting those types of infrastructure? People would love that. So there are models to get this done. We don't want to make shortcuts, but at the same time, we don't want to get bogged down and not able to transition the speed.
Now, yours is the Smart Energy Council. Is nuclear an alternative that you'd be open to?
So nuclear is an amazing technology, and many places around the world rely on nuclear, where they've got little land, they've got no renewable resources. In Australia, though, it really doesn't make much sense because nuclear will come online in the late 2030s, and it is the most expensive option. So solar and wind coming in at about $45 per megawatt hour. Nuclear would come in at about $350 per megawatt hour. So if you want your power bills to triple or quadruple in price, build a nuclear power plant.
But in terms of the sustainability, once you build a nuclear power plant, that just sits there and goes for a long, long time. With wind and solar, don't you have that issue where you have to replace, repair and so on?
Yeah, it's not so much repair and replace. It's more about the buffer of storage. So solar and wind are variable. That's why you need pumped hydro storage like Snowy 2.0, why you need big batteries to actually make that power available on demand to power the entire economy.
And finally, on the EV question, the government's talking about having the superchargers or the fast chargers doubling in their capacity over the next year. How do you see the trajectory of EV sales and the charging infrastructure?
So people have underestimated how quickly this transition will happen. New technology coming into Australia can see a charging in 10 minutes to almost 700 kilometres of range. So very, very quick charging times coming. Battery swapping technology as well. And the cost of EVs are now coming down and are going to push the old petrol cars basically out of the market. It's going to happen quicker than people think.
John Grimes, appreciate your time. Thanks.
Pleasure.